Good morning, everyone. We will get started shortly, but as the room is filled with attendees, please use the Zoom chat option to let us know which county you're joining us from so we can get a better feel of who our audiences and participants are today. Seminole County, we have some Central Florida, Sarasota County, Leon County, Tallahassee is in the building, St. Pete, Okaloosa, Jacksonville, Brevard. And if I skip over your county, I apologize. They're just coming in so fast. Claremont, Pinellas, St. John's, Broward County, a few from Broward County, Polk County, Seattle, Washington. Hmm, that's a good one. Port St. Lucie is in the building as well. Oh, fantastic. We have a great variety of participants that who will be joining us this morning. And we do have a treat for you for today's professional webinar session. So again, if you're just joining us, please use the Zoom chat option and just type in and let us know where you're joining us from this morning so we can get a better feel. We will begin in just about 1 minute. Um, We do have a group of guest speakers to join us today, and we will introduce everyone accordingly. So please stand by. St. Augustine, St. Johns County, Duval County, Seminole County. Okay. The link for CEU registration does not work. We are going to get to the bottom of that for you, Lewis, and the rest of participants, so do not worry. We will talk a little bit more on CEU options momentarily. So with that, I think it is now 10:02. We will be starting the professional webinar series. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Florida-Friendly Landscaping Professional Webinar Series. My name is Mark Celestin, and I am the training manager for the Florida-Friendly Landscaping program. We are excited to host you this morning. Your microphone have been muted. We will be closing the chat feature during the presentation. Please put your questions into the Q&A box, and we will take them at the end of the presentation. This webinar is approved for one FFLCP, LIAF, FDAX, FNGLA, and one ISA CEU. There is a $15 administration fee to receive a certificate for continuing education, CEUs. We will put a link in the chat box to make payment for the certificate if you have not already done so. If you're running into any problems, Rebecca and I will help you out. You will also see a survey invitation pop up. Please take a moment to complete it. It is an important tool that helps us shape future educational program and better serve upcoming audiences. We will submit for CEUs to the listening or licensing agencies on Friday. So make sure to finalize your CEU payments by the end of the day today. If you would like CEU credits for your attendance, please remember to do so. This is a part of a monthly webinar series that is held on the second Tuesday of every month at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Our next regularly scheduled webinar will be March 10th with guest speaker Ryan, who will be presenting on the topic of salt-tolerant plants for Florida. So please Mark your calendars. We're thrilled to have you join us today for our webinar on the topic of native landscape in everyday life, presented by three guest speakers, Andrew Landis, Stacy Metrazzo, and Cody Smith. Andrew Landis is the Conservative and Strategic Initiatives Division Manager at the City of Groveland, Florida, and an adjunct professor of environmental studies at Rowling College in Winter Park. The Conservation Division works across city departments to foster sustainable native landscape in Groveland, known as the city with natural charm. Downtown blocks have been revitalized and showcase native trees and plants. A wildflower rain garden has been installed at the historic Lake David Park to help filter stormwater. Working with partners Dix Height, Cherry Lake, Green Isles Gardens, Life Soils, and the Florida Wildflower Foundation, the city is pursuing native landscape along state roadways. A complete rewrite of Groveland's landscape code prioritizes tree preservation, water conservation, reduced sod coverage, native plants, and soil amendments. Next, we have Stacy Metrazzo. Stacy joined the Florida Wildflower Foundation in 2015 as its program manager. Before that, she worked for the foundation for several years as a contractor. She is the co-author of Native Plants for Florida Gardens, which she wrote with botanist, restoration ecologist Nancy Bissett. Stacy is an environmental educator with a bachelor's degree in environmental studies and a master's degree in liberal studies from Rawlings College, where she is also an adjunct professor. A native Floridian and certified Florida master naturalist, she spends much of her free time kayaking, hiking, birding, and photographing Florida's amazing natural environments. But last but not least, we have Mr. Cody Smith, a registered landscape architect in the state of Florida. Cody Smith served as the CEO of Dix Height and partners and has lived and practiced in Central Florida since 2008. Cody's intense respect and passion for the environment and culture of the places he designs is recognized by his teammates, colleagues, and clients, informing his approach and promising excellence in his finished work. His focus on parks, large-scale master planning projects, and urban design systems stems from this passion for people, culture, and the power of shared environments. Cody works to transform the perspective surrounding Florida's landscape by demonstrating all that is its natural ecologies have to offer. His knack for transforming an existing space into something new, special, and usable shines through with each passing project. Please help us to welcome Andrew, Stacy, and Cody.
Thank you, Mark. Good
Thank
morning,
you.
everybody. We good to go, Mark?
We're good to go.
All right, I'm going to share screen here. Give me 1 second. All right, everybody's seeing the presentation on the screen. We're good? Well, good morning, everybody. Excited to have so many of you here. Excited to speak alongside Stacy and Andrew. This is something that we do quite often, so I'm excited. I think specifically for this audience, I know that there's a lot of passionate individuals in the audience. I know there's a lot of professionals, a lot of people that know quite a bit in and around this world. So we're excited to share kind of the work that we've been doing, the ideas that we have, and this is, I think, focused on a little more of a fun scale. Specifically, it's this idea that we embody at Dix Height around implementing native landscapes and every single thing that you do throughout your daily lives. So There's this idea that, nature is something that you go and you look at. It's something that's remote. It's something that's protected. It's something that's distant. And what we're looking to do in close collaboration with like-minded partners like Andrew and Stacy, we're looking to implement this everywhere we can at all scales to create linkages, corridors, and normalize this type of movement every single day. So, just really quick, Stacy is our executive director at the Wildflower Foundation. I serve on the board for the Wildflower Foundation, and then Andrew is very passionate around the work that he's doing in the environment and in the city of Groveland. We are three passionate mission-based individuals. We are three groups that focus our energies around this mission as well. So we're very much like-minded in that. So today we plan to share some of the things that we're doing around how we've approached these types of projects, what we've learned around plant materials. We've had a lot of successes. We've had a lot of challenges. We've had some failures. We always do a little bit of a share, and this is actually something probably a little more aimed at some other audiences. But Stacy always likes to touch base on some of her current preferred plants based on performance. So we'll touch base on those as well. And then we're going to talk about a couple of examples around some pilot projects that we have ongoing. Um, we talk a lot about impacts on the natural environment. And one thing that we do when we give this presentation and when we speak to audiences is find your something, find your something to be passionate about, whether it's the natural ecologies of a site, whether it's storytelling, whether it's the impact on our water bodies, or on the future generations. What we always try to do is create an inspiration around something bigger. Um, we are focused on at all scales the ability to do something really special. We are not necessarily recreating ecosystems, but we can do a lot to support and normalize them and embed them into the expectations of everyday life. So, what we plan to speak on and touch base on is just generally expectations, how we manage expectations, what we're doing around this idea of implementing this type of landscape as many times as we can to normalize it. With that, as a landscape architect, I think our key role in this is kind of serving in the middle, and that's around design, how we design these systems effectively so that they can be appreciated and accepted. So it's kind of a major kind of like social, kind of cultural kind of play on how these landscapes are accepted and how we can move the needle more towards a natural system. And then ultimately, what are we seeing in the world of maintenance? What are we seeing in the world of the challenges of maintenance, and what lessons have we learned? Um, we have a publication out there. There's a QR code on the screen. This is also available on our website, but it's also available on the Outside Collaborative's website. So we co-authored the New Yard Pattern Book alongside the Outside Collaborative, which we'll touch base on a little more later on. And our focus of that is around the big four. So we are focused in these initiatives of lowering water use, increasing ecosystem benefits, improving the soils, and then managing pests holistically. So reduced herbicides, reduced pesticides, and better overall kind of management strategies. And I expect that many people are on the call have a lot of alignment around these. And again, when we speak to this, it's trying to find your key thing to latch onto, whether it's water, whether it's healthy soils, whether it's the future of the society, whether it's a cultural kind of long-term impact. And at Dixite, we say that we're designing for life. We bring sustainable landscapes to everyday life. So this is a mission to us. Um, Doug Talame, in one of his lectures that I sat in on, he told a story of a field trip where the kids all loaded onto a bus and they drove for an hour and they looked at nature and then they drove back for an hour. And then when they got home, the parent asked them how their field trip was, how their day was, and they said it was great. We went and looked at nature. What we're trying to do is the second you step outside of your threshold on your way to work, on your way to school, on your drive into work, while you're at work, we're trying to infuse these types of systems at every moment, not an hour away, not at a distant kind of relationship. We focus a lot at Dix Height of doing it ourselves. We we do not talk the talk without walking the walk. This is my house, so we look to make it personal. I'm from Indiana, so I think I have a really good appreciation for what goes into appreciating our natural landscapes and our natural systems. I've been down in this region since 2008, and I would say that it took me a good 5 to 7 years to understand, and then it takes me another 5 years to appreciate, and then it took me another 5 years to like become addicted to this type of landscape. And a lot of it is through homeownership or through practice. So making it personal, you start to understand how things ebb and flow. You understand how, the water usage might impact your financials, how water usage, seeing that on a piece of paper, how that might impact kind of overall kind of demands on the system, but also, having a family. So it's like whatever you got to hang on to, whatever you latch on to, make it personal. This is my daughter. 3 different phases. She just turned 3 this past about 2 weekends ago. Um, she spends a lot of time in the garden. And we spend a lot of time out there as a family. We get to know our neighbors a lot because we're out front, either relaxing and enjoying, picking strawberries, cutting herbs, and or just kind of simple, quiet maintenance in the garden itself. Uh, Been focused on working within the neighborhood. So this is actually directly across the street. This is our neighbor, and her husband had passed away, and so she had kind of inherited the duty of raking the leaves, blowing the leaves, and managing, the lawn that was underneath of this giant live oak. And all she could do was just kind of keep it at bay, keep it alive. And you can see even the little flag down there to the bottom right of, the pesticide recently applied. So we introduced the idea, and we worked with her. We did a design, we pulled the community together, and we flipped her yard. And this was about a month after installation. And this has been in the ground for about 7 months now, and she's no longer outside blowing leaves, raking leaves, bagging leaves. She's actually able to essentially have a regenerative leaf litter mulch into her landscape. And then further down the street, this appears a little pixelated, but I do a lot of quick hand sketches. And this will feed into a case study kind of later on. But a lot of what we're trying to do is implement these landscapes in everyday life for everyday people. And so these are another group of neighbors. This is 2 houses down from the house that I just showed. And it turns out that one of their uh, daughters had been battling with a chronic illness. And they became uber focused on what she was eating. And we started a conversation one day just around herbicides, chemicals. And again, this was like his goal was to have the most perfect green lawn, and he always struggled with a little bit of brown spot here and there. But they had adopted this idea, this bigger picture idea around implementing these types of landscapes because of their daughter's illness and because of what she was going through and what she was coping with. And so, knowing that they were a very traditional family, there's a couple of key indicators kind of to this garden design, and one of those being kind of the clean front door. So, when we talk about the design and creating clean edges, the garden itself might be a little bit messy. The material is mostly bulletproof. Probably about 10 to 20% of this overall area is the seasonal color associated with the perennials. And then you'll notice the front edge is jasmine, and then a clean hedgerow of Yopon hollies to establish that clean public realm edge and create order to the garden, which I'll touch base on. We do this at all scales. Again, like what we're focused on today is that kind of more nimble, fun, everyday scale. We work at the scale of hundreds of miles of roadways down to the single family residence. And again, like what we find is like our role is that, man, these messy landscapes have so much going for them. They're so valuable in what they provide and what they don't demand. And our job as landscape architects, I feel, is to create order to all of this. And so this idea of how we implement it, we do it on every single project. Every single one of our projects has a 75% native, 100% Florida friendly palette. We do it in moderation. Anything that we ever test, we do no more than a 10% test on a single project. So if something doesn't work, it doesn't have a catastrophic effect. If it is tested and proven, it rolls into the 90%. And then a big thing that we do is we provide order. So it's not the idea of just flipping the yard, not just the idea of just changing the turf grass to another ground cover alternative, but as landscape architects, providing frame and order to the spaces is really critical. So that it's coherent, accepted, it feels safe, it feels inviting, it creates spaces for people to live. So creating that order is really important, and that's kind of my core focus with this collaboration as a landscape architect. Kind of tested. Again, these are plant lists from a few recent projects, so it does test out. And then we also kind of big picture wise, we look to native plant communities for recipes. So if you think about if you're kind of baking a cake, you're going to have a recipe book. You're going to be following that recipe. So a lot of times when we start to design, we start to look at the native plant communities, what naturally grows there, what would have grown there, and what goes well together. We provide a lot of order and orderly frames. This image that you see behind us, this is a 100% native landscape, but it has order to the park type structure. And then also we are using more and more mixes to again kind of harken back to that natural system. But one big win that we just saw in the past few weeks is due to the freeze. We use firebush quite a bit, but we use it within a mix. So when we lose one or two firebush in the overall scheme of a mix, it has less of a detrimental impact than if we use large scale masses. Now that has some downward effects and challenges associated with maintenance and understanding, but there is this beauty and this idea, this undulating landscape around the use of mixes itself. So I'm going to hand it over to Stacy to speak to what she's doing with the Wildflower Foundation, and then Andrew, and then we'll talk about some of pilot projects.
Thanks, Cody. Thanks everyone for being here today. If you're not familiar with our organization, we are a statewide nonprofit, and our mission is to protect, connect, and expand native wildflower habitat. We do that through education, research, and planting programs. We are funded in large part by that lovely license plate that you see on the screen, in addition to donations and memberships and grants. One of our overarching goals that guides our work is to create what we are calling and what our habitat networks. So within the urban and the curated environment in Florida, reintroducing native plants, the native plants that would have occurred there or that feed the wildlife and pollinators that live there so that we can create these networks of habitat for our wildlife. And so these networks will form pathways for pollinators, allowing them to travel through the built environment and find the food and resources they need. With all the development that is occurring here in Florida, where we're moving so much of our natural landscapes to accommodate for human needs, but we can utilize those spaces in a way that that provides the resources for our pollinators and other wildlife moving through. But these habitat networks will also create livable landscapes where people can enjoy the benefits of nature around their homes and in public spaces. Just like Cody said, we don't need to go an hour away just to experience nature when we can have it right in our front and backyards. So here at the foundation, our efforts include planting grants that support the installation of native plant landscapes in public settings, municipal areas and public parks. The mention earlier of the rain garden in Groveland was one that we funded through a grant program. We also support research on better site preparation, plant and site maintenance. Cody will talk about maintenance a little bit later. That's very key to success, is understanding what your plants need. So we are trying to get that information and figure out what do we need to know to make sure these plants survive. We're also looking at propagation techniques that will help native plant growers increase their supply, which then makes them more available to you. And finally, we offer educational resources that help professionals and the public identify, select, plant, and maintain native plant species for all types of landscapes. So we have many of those resources online. I think they're in a slide you'll see a little bit later, but you can use them. So know that we are here to support you and provide resources and assistance and maybe even funding. just on the screen now, you'll see just some of the benefits that we find from using native plants. Florida has some unique conditions, climate-wise, soils, things that happen here like hurricanes and fire. And our native plants are adapted to those unique conditions, as well as adapted to provide the food that our wildlife need, as well as habitat, things that they need for finding shelter and creating nests. And they also feed the pollinators that feed us. We are an agricultural state, but that agriculture is not providing everything that our wildlife needs. So putting those native plants in our landscape can help give them the nutrients they need. And of course, if you use the right plant in the right place, it should require less water, no fertilizers, no herbicides or other chemicals. And it should give back to the environment too by enriching soil, controlling erosion, and doing other things that our native plants are meant to do. So I think from there, I'm going to hand it over to Andrew, and then I'll come back and talk about some great native plants.
Thank you, Stacy and Cody. My name is Andrew Landis. I work for the City of Groveland. I manage the Conservation and Strategic Initiatives Division. Next slide, please. And we are the city with natural charm. It's a brand that the city started embracing in 2019. We used to have a brand called Watch Us Grow, and we wanted to have kind of a different ethos to build the city around as it grows rapidly. Some of the things we do, I started out as the planning and zoning manager here for 3 years, and then they allowed me to start a conservation division because we had a lot of different things in the works, like our dark sky program, our natural lands program. But a big piece also is our conservation landscapes, which is what we're here to talk about today. And so we're updating our landscape code. We have actually worked with Dix Height. They were a consultant to the city to help with the effort. It's not been adopted yet, but it's kind of going through the review channels still. And there's a number of different conservation practices kind of built in to reduce, eliminate irrigation, chemical pesticides that Cody mentioned. We're really trying to celebrate our natural flora and fauna and educate our citizenry about what that entails. Increase our tree canopy. We have one of the lowest tree canopies in the region in terms of percentage. We're really trying to grow that and in turn increase biodiversity. Cody. And this is just some of the different plants that we incorporate into our landscapes. We've used all these in different ways. This is originally for a project we worked on with Dix Height. I think I have another list, but some of these are shrubs, some of them are small trees, and a lot of them are featured in our downtown. We're trying to find alternatives to things like that are commonly used, like the crepe myrtle, and offer our homeowners associations some different types of plant palette options. And these are some of the wildflowers and smaller shrubs we're including in that. Next slide, please. And so we have a number of tree preservation goals. We always think here about simplifying the process. Since I've been here at the city, we've rewritten our entire code with the exception of the landscape portion. And we're always thinking about, the end user. And we're really trying to prioritize, large, irreplaceable trees and encourage, a diversity of tree types in between our live oak, canopy. Next slide, please. And maintenance is everything when you're doing these type of landscapes. And the city hadn't really maintained its trees, very well for about a decade. And so one of the first things we started to do is really take stock of our tree canopy, do an inventory of what we have. We have a lot of old live oaks in the downtown that required a lot of pruning. So we got ahead of that. And then the hurricane that came about 2 years ago really helped with that too. And we followed up with a lot of maintenance after that. But finding your team, finding your partners, it was very difficult to find a good arborist that really understood what we were trying to achieve here in Groveland. And we went through a couple until we landed on a good fit. Next slide, please. And we have a number of water conservation goals like any city. We have a consumptive use permit, and we have to have certain standards in place to maintain that and be able to grow as a city. One of the things we're looking at doing is the Water Star Silver program, which would be in concert with the Water Management District. But it's really all about reducing turf grass, reducing runoff into our waterways, and really reducing the amount of water we use every day. One of the things we've done is experiment with compost to improve our soil health. We find that with most development projects, they come in and they grade the site, scrape it, bring in a lot of fill dirt, and it's not really a medium that supports plant life. This is an example of us. This is our amphitheater at Lake David Park, one of the most visited spaces in the city where people come for all sorts of concerts and events, meaning the lawn area gets trampled on frequently. And so we added compost and aerated the soil 2 years ago to try to improve that, and it did pay dividends. Life Soils is another big partner out here. And a lot of us are connected through the Outside Collaborative that Cody mentioned before. We're doing a number of different streetscape plantings in the downtown. One of the things we always have to be concerned about is our fire department. They have a ladder truck that's new, and it operates at 14 feet height. So as we install new street trees, we have to be very cognizant of the pruning and the ability to accommodate the fire truck. And that's really a state law as well. Go ahead, Cody. One of the cool things in the code we're working on is buffer standards. We had a really dated approach to doing buffers, and we really required a lot more plant material than might be necessary. We want to allow plants and trees to grow to their full fruition and allow enough space for that to occur while also providing good screening. And so one of the things we worked with Dix Height on closely was to think through new buffer requirements that would be indicative of this new type of landscape we're advocating for. And then at the edges, we definitely want to make sure we're reducing turf grass and any type of herbicide or pesticide runoff into our waterways. And so we put restrictions on turf at the edges and require different types of swales and rain gardens to filter water along waterways. We've done some pilot projects rather, several since I've been here, starting maybe 4 years ago with the rain garden at Lake David Park, which was part of a new design for the park where they had installed 66 linear feet of rocks, large rocks to filter water as it went down the slope towards the lake. And I thought, oh, we can do much better than that. Let's put a bunch of plantings in that can help filter that water. And we worked to come up with a design. We did it as a kind of an internal project, and the Wildflower Foundation helped support it to get it installed. And the Wildflower Foundation has been a great partner. They've also helped us with other projects like the Wildflower Medium project on State Road 50. Dix Height helped design that, and we installed that about a year and a half ago, about a year ago now. And it's a good, we've learned a lot of lessons from it. So we'll talk about that in a moment. Next slide, please. And so, you can hire a professional landscape architect like Cody, which we often do at the city, but we also try to do some stuff on the back of the napkin, if you will, quick and dirty. This was a little exercise for the rain garden that we just did in Canva. It looks like a lot of dots on a map, and there might not be a lot of thought behind it, but there's a ton of thought that goes into these landscapes, and having the right plant in the right place. And then even once we install them, we learn, as we maintain them over a period of time, what plant works, what plant might not be doing as well, and we regroup as we go along. This is just some pictures of us installing it, and after it was planted and kind of filled in, we labeled all the plants so that the public, would know how to bring some of this home. That's one thing we're passionate about, is really teaching some of this to our citizenry. So even in our downtown, we have similar plant markers just as a teaching tool. We installed the wildflower project I mentioned at the Plotlakaha Bridge, which is the eastern entrance to the city from the Claremont side. It's a very difficult place to have a landscape. There's a lot of wind there. It's whipping across the roadway along the river crosses the roadway, or rather the roadway crosses the river. The bridge there, the traffic is just very fast. It's 55 miles an hour right there. And so very inhospitable for plants, for people, for maintenance, even for wildlife. So a number of the challenges we had, we don't have irrigation out there either. So we had to water it in for a period of time. We didn't, plant it really at the perfect time to receive nature's water. So we ended up having to put in a lot of water ourselves, and we learned from these. So, but Cody talks about this cultural language, and there's a certain visual expectation when you're driving through a community or traveling down the highway. So we try to mimic some of that, even though these landscapes can appear a little less formal and messier sometimes. Go ahead. And one of the things we did initially, one of our council members came to us and said, "Hey, we'd like to do these wildflowers through 6 miles of Groveland." And everyone I talked with that was in the field said, "Whoa, let's pump the brakes on that and do a pilot project and choose an area that we can learn from before we start to do the entire 6 miles." FDOT does have a planting program to do wildflowers, but they have not been able to get the seeds that they need annually for the last few years. There's a big supply issue with wildflower seeds. And so since we weren't able to join that program, we're kind of doing it incrementally ourselves right now. And we looked at 3 different types of intensity. And so the landscape we installed, because it's coming into the city as a gateway, we did a more high intensity, and I'll experiment a little bit with the medium intensity as well. Kind of have 2 zones. It's 500 linear feet. Go ahead, Cody. And this is it. It's not a very fun picture, but you can see that we have a couple of anchor multi-trunk trees, which is what is commensurate with that type of design speed that FDOT will approve. So we have the fringe tree and the Yopon holly, just a couple of each to kind of anchor the rest of the landscape. And then other common things that you see in native Florida landscapes like woolly grass, saw palmetto, and some of the other native plants on the list. Florida green eyes is one that's endemic to this area, so we always try to include Florida green eyes in our landscapes. It does really well out here in dry and wet landscapes, it seems. This, you can't really read this slide, but I like to show it because this shows the thought that goes behind, putting these types of landscapes together. You can see this is a calendar, and so we try to have different types of color for each month of the throughout the year, so we're not getting all purples in one month and yellows in another. So you have some diversity in color palette. Next, Cody. And so you can see the installation here and the team out there putting it in and kind of what it looked like after it got installed. It's still a challenge for us, I'll say. Go ahead, Cody. These are some of the plants after they were installed. Conradina, trying to see what they are. This is, keep going, Cody, because I know I have other slides. This is what it looked like after it started to kind of fill in and get overgrown a bit in the winter. And it requires, teaching your team. This is the probably biggest takeaway for all of us is that, the maintenance side of things is very challenging. To get the right contractors, we're a city. Jobs have to be competitively bid. If you work with a small contractor, that has limitations sometimes if they get sick or, have a family emergency. And so we're still working on this one. Go ahead, Cody.
And Andrew, one of the things that I kind of like to highlight here is, so we talk about this kind of cultural cue or cultural language, and one thing that we did strategically here was created the Bahia strips, which actually has mimosa plugged into it. And that simple move of creating kind of a maintained mode edge, I think creates a higher level of acceptance for this type of landscape. It indicates that, hey, we are caring for this landscape. Even on the image on the right, that's actually full of poor man's pepper, which actually came from the outside in. We did not plant it, but it actually bloomed really effectively. It's a native wildflower, actually. But it did kind of create a cool effect, but I think that mode edge. And then one thing is, the photo on the right, if we turn 180 degrees, that was post planting, probably 3 months, and in the dead middle of the drought that we get kind of early in the year. So this is the image looking the other way. So like um, this landscape probably wasn't as successful as we had hoped, but it's determined level of success compared to turning around 180 degrees and looking down the rest of the median. It could be seen as successful. And then the image on the right is actually standing within the bed, looking directly down onto the plant material that's probably at this point 3 months into like no rain, if any. So it's a balance of what we determine as successful and the cues that we provide to indicate that it's actually being cared for. And then this, Andrew, you'll say, like trying to even just keep up with the mowing on the edges, I think sometimes is challenging. But once those edges are mowed, it creates a nice kind of order and sense of enclosure to the plant material that has thrived. Now this has become a little bit weedy, a little bit of a mix. It's a hard landscape to maintain, but it does create that order.
And it looks a lot better today. We have a lot of plants to fill in, but that order is there. We happen to get some really, really good Argentinian Bahia, and it's performed really well for more than a year now. And then that sunshine mimosa, as Cody said, is starting to kind of appear at different times. You'll have a little purple
Nice.
flower pop up. But it does, right now, it actually looks a lot better because of that. We also were required to have a pull off for cars on a road with this design speed. So we had to have some sort of grassy strip there. So it actually worked in our favor. Next slide. And so this is just some of the partners it took to do this one little tiny 500 linear foot project. I like to show this because it shows, the level of activity it takes and the, number of partners it takes to do something like this. And different groups had different roles. Arbor Group, that's our arborist, but they actually ended up doing the landscape installation. Cherry Lake's a big partner and they provide a lot of plant material, as did Green Hog Gardens, Life Soils. JSJ sells the Life Soils material and some other things we needed for the landscape. REC is where we got some other plants. Smoky Valley, we got the sod. We always use pine straw in our landscapes out here. We prefer it to pine bark, and we think it's more indicative of like a native, Florida landscape. And so, fortunately, my coworker Tim came to me last week and said that the mayor would like to see, pine straw consistently through all of our landscapes in the city. So that's good. It's spreading a little bit. And this is our splitter island. We also applied the same philosophy to this. This is where you enter the downtown, coming from the east into Groveland. And it's also a freshly installed landscape, about 6 months now. It's a little bit different than what you see on the screen. We ended up putting sod where the brick is at the nose. But the rest of it's all native and filling in and a work in progress, because these landscapes, when they're young, they take a lot of TLC. So we have a lot of young pines that are doing their best. One of the coolest projects I've worked on in my career is the Oak Tree Union Colored Cemetery at Taylorville. It's an old African-American cemetery that was covered in invasive exotic species, earpod trees primarily. You can see the picture in the top right of the coverage. It was also landlocked and would have probably been built upon, developed as a subdivision. It was brought to the city's attention that there were some people buried there. After LiDAR scanning and ground penetrating radar, there's only a dozen headstones out there that we found, and none of them were in their original locations. Most of them were broken, even the ones that were for children. There's World War I veterans and a lot of the founders of the city buried in this cemetery. After all the scanning, we found out there's likely up to 300 people buried there. They've discovered over 250. And so we got a grant for only $500,000 from the state to do restoration here. We probably spent, 4 to 6 times that to do the job, the right way. The state said we could put up a sign saying some people are buried here. And we said, no, we're going to do this the right way. Our fire chief, Kevin Carroll, led the effort. And he insisted on having a grave marker for every individual and in granite. And he asked me to reach out to some partners and see who wanted to get involved in this from a landscape restoration perspective. And Dick's Height, I had just met them when this project started, and they actually jumped at the opportunity. It was hard to ask someone you just met for something so big, but they donated like a amazing, 6-figure type landscape plan. And this is what it resulted in. And we installed this whole thing mostly ourselves. So city staff and volunteers from the city, volunteers from Dick's Height, volunteers from the community out here painstakingly working for over a year to get this landscape to be what it is today. And they blended, there was a lot of restrictions on the project because the state archaeologist was involved and we couldn't go down more than 8 inches across most of the site. There's no bodies buried on the north end of the site, which is where you see the structure and some of the more formal plantings. So Dick's Height was able to bring their design expertise and create some formal and informal spaces that juxtapose nicely and create spaces for remembrance and reflection. And I'll let you keep going, Cody.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, I mean, the thing to touch on here is a native landscape can be very formal. It can be hedged. They can create groves. It can create order. It can create space and frame. And then this is a very civic style of landscape ultimately. So like again, like everyday life, it can be installed everywhere you can imagine. There's no place that it can't be installed for the benefits that it brings. And so another kind of a big theme that I always want to kind of encourage the audience is the idea of partnerships. The Wildflower Foundation, we do a lot of partnerships. We do several plantings every single year with schools, with cities, with counties. So if you have ideas, if you need help, we're here. Andrew is a really great partner. Anybody associated with the Outside Collaborative is a great partner. This is a project that we did with the Wildflower Foundation with the City of Longwood. So this is actually their city hall in downtown Longwood in the historic core. You'll see it's kind of full of dollarweed, St. Augustine, and hedged cast iron plant is what we started with. And this all started with an idea that we had done a park space with the city, and it's just like, why can't every single place or why can't a civic landscape become more naturalized and accepted within the city? And so the Parks Department became really excited. Stacy was a really great partner in providing the funding as well as sourcing the plants and even and coming the day of and volunteering efforts. So it was a really incredible opportunity. My capacity on the board with the Wildflower Foundation is all around kind of creating partnerships and then supporting design and sketches. This is all outside of Dick's Height, kind of alongside our efforts. One big thing is that we learned quite a bit. Stacy was so kind that she provided initial funding, but also about 8 months later came back and we had to do a refresh because there were a lot of lessons learned. So we had to redesign some portions of the garden and then work more closely with the maintenance team. So again, this was it, kind of the first time I ever looked at it. Pretty sterile landscape, actually a landscape that was probably requiring quite a few inputs around water, herbicide, pesticide, chemical treatments, hedging and mowing. And then on the image on the left, that was the day of the planting. This was about 2,500 square feet, which we found is kind of a nice scale, kind of a nice maximum scale to work with the community and work with volunteer efforts. The image on the right is at post-planting. This is it in its first fall, kind of in the bloom. You'll see that, there was actually a significant issue with the dollarweed that sits on top of a septic tank. So it took about a year to get the dollarweed and some replanting to get that under control. Again, this is it, a part of that first fall. We used probably too many mixes on this particular project. Probably had a few too many plants. I have over 120 species in my house, so sometimes it's hard to pull back and restrain. But it ultimately came down to the biggest challenge was the city staff knowing what's what. And so we've spent quite a bit of time with them in the field, and they actually did not maintain this landscape for like 6 months because they just assumed it was just a maintenance-free landscape. But rather we talk to it as a quiet landscape, a quiet maintenance landscape. So we encourage them, grab your 5-gallon bucket, go out there and pull weeds. And we are working with them pretty consistently on what's a weed, how to manage that. And then when we went back and did a redesign, we carved out some of the kind of the messier parts of the landscape that might have been too intermixed to create more consistent massings of plants in the 3, 5, and 7 kind of groupings, so that way they can discern that these 3 look alike. I know what weed to pull. Those 5 look alike. I know what weed to pull versus there's one here, there's one over there. It was really hard for them to discern. So the image on the left is actually it after the refresh, which was about 8 months later. And this was another contribution from the Wildflower Foundation. And then this is it that kind of later that spring again. So like the clumpings of the porterweed, the clumpings of the dune sunflower. When we did milkweed, we arranged them back behind the sign just so that they're more recognizable in the landscape. Stacy, touch on some of your favorite plants right now.
Yes, sure. Yeah, I'm going to quickly discuss a few need-to-know native ground covers, wildflowers, grasses, and shrubs, some that some of you may be familiar with. All of these are tried and true, easy to maintain once you know what to do with them, and readily available at most native nurseries. And I just want to reinforce that by utilizing native plants, we do have the opportunity to beautify our landscapes with plants that serve an abundance of important functions and that don't contribute negatively to our environment or put undue strains on them. So that's, there's lots of plants out there you can choose, but the native ones do more than just fill the space and look good. So this here, we'll start with ground covers. These are great alternatives to turf. This is twin flower, which you did see in one of Andrew's planting photos. This is a low-growing, spreading plant. It fills in and creates these nice dense mats of ground cover with these cute little purple flowers. Has a very long bloom season, generally spring through fall. Can handle some shade, although more of the shade-tolerant wildflowers, yes, they're good for shade, but the shadier the landscape, the leggier your plants are going to be, and the less flowering you'll see. So depending on what you're needing them for, the more sun they can have, the more, wow factor they're going to have as well. Next, Cardi. I think Sunshine Mimosa is next. Yes, another
Yep.
great ground cover option. This is one, actually, twin flower too. You can mow over this. So if you are trying to incorporate it into turf or use it as a turf replacement, you can mow it. We recommend down to about 5 or 6 inches. You don't want to cut it all the way to the ground. That's going to burn it and kill it. But it does respond to mowing, and also is really hardy. So if it's in an area that gets walked on, that's usually not a problem. It is a spring and summer bloomer typically, but then it has this lovely little kind of fern-like leaf that's really nice, even when it's not in bloom. Next, we have frog fruit. This is another great option. If you have St. Augustine grass, you probably already have this plant anyway, because it kind of likes to find its way in there. It's a host plant. All the ground covers I've mentioned are host plants for a couple different butterfly species too. But this is another one that really forms these nice dense mats. You can mow it if you need to. It blooms year round, so you've got a nice source of food for a lot of small pollinators. Yeah, I mentioned it's a lot of a host. One more ground cover this is kind of a ground cover, but it's also a little bit shrubby. So this is not a ground cover you're going to walk on. But it is nice when you're trying to keep a low profile in an area and fill it in. Don't confuse this with the invasive porterweed. Our native porterweed is low growing and spreading, whereas the invasive one is kind of tall and conical in shape. It's very distinctly different, but that one is invasive. And of course, this is our native. Is not very drought tolerant. It does form kind of a woody base. So again, it's not something that you're going to want to walk on, but it's good ground cover for those areas that you just need a low buffer or low ground cover. Next, please. Wildflowers are great for adding that pop of color to a landscape. They add some dimension depending on how you incorporate them, and they mix well with grasses too to create a really nice aesthetic. This is green eyes that Andrew mentioned before, endemic to Central Florida. This has a really extended bloom time. On the screen, I should have mentioned this, on the screen are some little icons that will clue you in to what the plants are are going to offer you. This one usually spring, summer, but here in Central Florida, and as we get further south, it does tend to bloom year round. But it has a really big tuberous root once it's established, so it's incredibly drought tolerant. And it has a nice little basal leaf structure, so when it's not blooming, it still looks nice on the ground. And it smells like chocolate when it's in bloom. So that's just a nice, cool feature. False rosemary, another good low growing kind of shrubby wildflower. Very aromatic. It's a member of the mint family, so it has a nice aroma to it as well. Long bloom period, especially for those public spaces where the aesthetic is really important. It's good to look for those plants that have that really long bloom time. So there's something interesting for people to appreciate, while of course also providing for our pollinators as well. This is nice for like a low mass planting, a low buffer as well, because it only gets to about 2 to 3 feet tall. Also very drought tolerant. Next, please. Black-eyed Susan, probably something that everyone's pretty familiar with. Just a really nice clump forming wildflower, long bloom period, can tolerate some shade, some variance in soil moistures too. But it's a prolific seeder, so if you have a few plants and they're happy, you'll probably get a lot more in return. This one can act as an annual or perennial, depending on where you are in the state. So, but that high seed production will give you a lot of flowers returning. Next, please. Tropical sage, another great one with a long bloom period. Again, usually summer, fall, but Central and South Florida, it tends to bloom year round. Another prolific seeder, so it will spread all over, sometimes when you don't want it to. But it's a great pollinator plant, really easy to introduce because it's very forgiving and doesn't require a lot of maintenance. You can cut it back after the seeds or after the flowers bloom, and that will encourage some more blooming too. But it's really adaptable for just a variety of landscape types. Next, please. Grasses are really important to add texture and movement to a landscape. They also help with erosion control. They're nice to have. I have a sloped front yard, so I've got grasses down at the front. It really keeps those soils from running out into the street. This is love grass. What you see on the left, that purple love grass is in bloom. Elliott's is very similar, a little bit lighter in color. But they bloom in fall, but when they're not in bloom, they still are really nice evergreen bunch grass or clump grass. Love grasses are really adaptable to conditions, and they've got a really cool foliage color, that kind of bluish silvery color. So it's interesting even when it's not in bloom. But you can use these as specimen plants in groupings or mix them with wildflowers, and they look really nice. Muley grass is probably very familiar to most of you. It's commonly used as a specimen or in mass for this dramatic fall aesthetic when it's nice and full in bloom. But it's adaptable, it's hardy, it's drought, wind tolerant, salt tolerant too, so good for coastal landscapes as well. Let me keep moving here. I think we're getting close on time. Firebush, shrubs are great to include as foundational plants, and they give structure to the landscape. They can be used as focal points or borders, hedges. Firebush is a good one because it's evergreen. It flowers and fruits year round and simultaneously. So you've got all kinds of resources for wildlife while also looking really beautiful with these lovely red tubular flowers and nice dark purple berries too. Simpson stopper is great for a hedge or a buffer. You can plant them really tight together. They prune really easily if that's something that you need. But it has really fragrant leaves, fragrant flowers, and then an abundance of fruit for our wildlife in the fall. So you can find a lot more plant profiles on our website. FLAwildflowers.org. We have resources for selecting and planting, maintaining native plants, just so much information. So please check that out. This is some of the resources we have, guides for selecting grasses, aquatic, shady plants, whatever you need. You can find it on our website. And I encourage you to visit fan or plantrealflorida.org. to find a nursery near you that specializes in native plants. Other organizations that also provide great resources to learn more about the plants that are going to work best in your landscapes. Thank you.
And we touched on the Outside Collaborative. They have a really great website with a lot of great content, including the New Yard Pattern book. And then also encourage everybody to go out and get this beautiful state wildflower license plate as well. It is the top source of funding for the Wildflower Foundation. It's pretty incredible, the benefits that it provides to the foundation and the research and education.
Thanks, Cody. I just want to also mention that our grant period is open right now. So if you do have a project, a landscape project that you're working on or want to see if we can fund it, please check out our website to learn more about our grant programs.
Thank you all. That's it, Mark.
So with that, thank you so much, Cody, Stacy, and Andrew, for a wonderful and very engaging presentation. The chat is actually very active. However, we will not have enough time to go through some of the questions. But just to wrap us up, Cody, is there any way that the audience can get in contact with you all directly in the event that they want to clarify or verify something that was mentioned during today's presentation?
Yes, of course. My email, well,
I can,
all
I was gonna say I
those
can add
are
my email to the
online.
chat.
Yeah, we can add our emails to the chat. Mine's
Okay.
pretty readily accessible via our website too.
Yes, me too.
And I think also just, yeah, reach out partnerships if you're looking for funding, resources, whatever it may be. That's the goal of this overarching message.
Absolutely.
But I will add my email to the chat, and Stacy did.
Thank you very much. So with that, we would like to thank everyone for joining us today for another wonderful professional webinar series. And we are looking to see you at the next one on March 10th. Thank you, Cody. Thank you, Stacy, and thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah.
Take care.
See y'all.